Hello, and thank you for joining us for the latest in Education Today's series of webinars looking at current topics in UK education. My name is Jonathan Swift, and I am the Managing Editor of Education Today. Today, we're taking as our topic Playing Catch-Up, why it's important to tackle low literacy in Year 7, in which we discuss how addressing literacy at the beginning of secondary school can really benefit all of your students today and in later life. To help us unpack this topic and put it firmly in a school setting, I'm delighted to welcome along a trio of speakers. Literacy experts Jane Eyre from Eyre Consultancy and Christine Cork from Target Literacy, and Richard Michael from assistive learning solutions provider TextHelp. Christine will be explaining why we need interventions. Jane will show us how we can, in practice, help every student to reach their potential. And Richard will tell us how TextHelp can help you achieve this. Before we get going, a quick housekeeping note for you. Please make use of the questions facility on the webinar screen to put your questions to our speakers. The webinar runs for an hour and a quarter today, so we should be able to deal with any questions raised, but should time run short, any we've been unable to deal with will be forwarded to the relevant speakers for follow-up. One final note. We'd ask you please to use the rating system for this webinar to help us evaluate how useful they are to you, our audience. Just click on the rate button at the end of the webinar and let us know what you think. So, with that said, I'll now hand over to Christine to get us started and to give us her insight on playing catch-up, why it's important to tackle low literacy in Year 7. Christine, it's over to you.
Thank you, Jonathan. It's lovely to be here today. I'm a director of an independent consultancy service, Target Literacy, and I've been involved in literacy as a specialism virtually all the 30 years that I've been in teaching, starting as a literacy leader and then leading literacy teacher, then became a literacy and primary strategy consultant. I trained 12 years ago to be a reading recovery teacher leader and brought reading recovery to Kent 12 years ago. And I really specialise in literacy learning and literacy difficulties. So that's my background. Currently, I'm a teacher and an advisor. I work in two schools at opposite ends of the spectrum, and it's proving fascinating. One is an infant school where children are just learning how the written code works. And the other is a secondary school for children with ASD and social communication disorder, with or without anxiety. And of course, these children have been trying to get to grips with the written code for many years, and their attempts or struggles to understand can manifest themselves in attitudinal and motivational problems. However, these also exist for pupils in Year 1. Very interesting to see children at the different ends of the spectrum. So, what I'm going to be covering in this presentation is the importance of tackling low literacy early in Year 7. We're going to look at some conceptual frameworks which will help us to consider where literacy difficulties might lie in order to consider relevant approaches. And due to the brief nature of this webinar, I will really try to focus more on reading than writing, although the two obviously interlink. So low levels of literacy clearly impact on the whole of a pupil's attainment at school and their potential in later adult life. It's well documented that literacy difficulties experienced in school impacts throughout an adult's life. Opportunities to thrive in education, work and even health outcomes are significantly reduced with good literacy skills. And as the next slide highlights, there is even a correlation between low literacy and crime. Neil Gaiman gave a lecture for the Reading Agency, and he was talking about being in New York and listening to a talk about private prisons and how they predict for future growth. How many cells are they going to need? How many prisoners are there going to be 15 years from now? And they found they could predict it very easily using an algorithm which was based on asking what percentage of 10 and 11-year-olds couldn't read, and certainly couldn't read for pleasure. And personally, I find that really shocking and really drive me even further to try to support all children with literacy development. If we think about the scale of the literacy problem, the scale of that problem, is big. Clearly, children have different difficulties with literacy, and I quite like this image of an iceberg. Oh, and it's gone. This image that actually, the image of thinking about a child we can manifest, we can see a child's literacy difficulties manifesting itself with a child who's struggling, but underneath those difficulties, they are really, really quite complex and quite difficult. So the child is the top of an iceberg, but underneath these issues are really quite hard to uncover. Okay, sorry, there's a slight slide issue there. The Education Endowment Foundation reports that 1 in 7 pupils will begin secondary school as a struggling reader, that is, reading and writing below age-related expectations. In certain socio-economic groups, this increases to 1 in 4, and this graph really reveals that in recent years, the proportion of pupils not achieving age-related expectations has remained at a similar level, between 13 and 17%. And of these struggling readers, only 1 in 10 is likely to achieve 5A star to C at GCSE. Low-level literacy and weak reading skills do tend to be correlated with weak oral language skills, which I'm sure we're not surprised about. And this means that some pupils really arrive ill-equipped to deal with the listening, the academic talk, reading comprehension, writing skills, to deal with the challenges of academic language that will be expected of them in Year 7. These challenges, that transition from Year 6 to Year 7, are clearly significant. I've spent time talking to children in Year 7 about those difficulties that they feel they are facing, and some of the things they've said have been quite fascinating. One child said, "I found reading different in Year 7 to last year. One thing is the vocabulary. There's so much more of it now in all subjects. It really helps when teachers tell us the meanings and get us to talk about them. You have more reading in different subjects. The words are longer, and so are the things we have to read. Reading is just longer in Year 7, the sentences, words, and the things we have to read." I can really feel for them about just the pure length of things that they have to read. Having conversations with our pupils about what it is that they're facing that is difficult to them can be really revealing. Secondary teachers teach their subject, is often what they say, but not the reading that you have to do in that subject. They're having to do with increased use of academic language, and they're expected to read, talk, write using this language and this new vocabulary. If pupils are given support with this, it can raise attainment across all subjects. So anything we can do to ease that transition between the two different diets of Year 6 and Year 7 is likely to have impact on struggling learners in literacy. If we think about the primary curriculum, often the diet of reading is more towards fiction than non-fiction. This may reverse in Year 7. Often primary children who are struggling with reading often receive high levels of support across the curriculum in reading, and in Year 7 that reading support may continue only in English. So to get to these children early in secondary school is clearly going to be very, very important. Year 7 is an important window of opportunity to address low levels of literacy, because early intervention is both cost-effective and is likely to lead to better outcomes. Without early intervention, the gap between these pupils and their average peers continues to widen. And from my experience, some secondary schools take months to undertake pupil testing and analysis in order to identify pupils with low literacy levels. And I think that's too many months wasted. It can mean that 1 or 2 terms at that really important transition time in the autumn of Year 7, where catch-up potential is greatest, can be missed. So let's go on to thinking about how we might spot signs of low literacy early in Year 7. The simple view of reading is helpful as it identifies 4 types of readers who have potentially different types of problems. The simple view describes how 2 relatively separate skills are required for successful reading and can be used to explain variation in pupil performance. So I've numbered these different quadrants, but each of them relate to decoding and language comprehension, either strengths or weaknesses in either of those. So we can see that potentially we have children coming into Year 7 who could fit within any of those quadrants. Children who are struggling are likely to fit within the quadrants 2 to 4. Child in number 1 is fine. They're likely to have age-appropriate levels in reading. If we look across the top left, child in quadrant number 2, these pupils may understand a text well if it's read to them, but it's the word reading skills that are proving challenging here, the decoding. And the tendency here is for teachers to allocate a phonics program to the child, and that would make sense. Research appears to indicate that programs that address just one skill, for example in phonics, in isolation, are likely to be less successful than approaches which integrate learning in different aspects of application of phonics into reading and writing. So in other words, phonics applied. So any intervention programs which are based on reading recovery principles and practice, where sub-skills are applied into continuous reading and writing of text, any of those interventions are likely to have good impact, and I shall list a few at the end of my presentation. Let's look down at the bottom right, pupil number 3. He looks quite happy, actually, but there are issues there. Just because a child can read the words on the page, so in other words, they're good decoders, doesn't mean that they can understand them. And I'm sure we've all heard children, we might term barking at print, where they're reading the words, but we know that they're not really understanding. Of course, accurate decoding doesn't guarantee comprehension. And just because a child can decode well, this can potentially mask difficulties with reading comprehension. So any intervention approaches which aims to teach and boost active comprehension approaches, such as inference training, which again I will mention at the end, can support this pupil. And then down bottom left we have pupil number 4, where we have problems with decoding and language comprehension. This pupil might have some skills in place, so it may be, for example, that they can decode the words on the page but with very little fluency, or that they're really rushing and not noticing punctuation, or that they struggle with reading longer words, or that they have some basic comprehension of text but they struggle with higher order inference. The big issue with these pupils, of course, is that they're all likely to have a very different profile from each other. No 2 pupils' literacy difficulties will be the same. So the first aim for Year 7 teachers is to identify these 3 groups of struggling pupils and select attainment criteria for them to receive support. Now, I'm sure that some of you are considering that simple view is pretty simple, and it doesn't take into account other factors such as motivation or sensory problems or specific additional needs, but nevertheless it's a useful tool for schools. So if we think about the tools that we could use to actually decide on where these pupils are with their literacy, ways that we might do it. Very simple, not difficult with a little professional development for teachers or TAs to take on board. The first one being taking a running record, is a very simple way of recording a child reading aloud approximately 100 words. And we can listen to their decoding, we can listen to their fluency, we can see what's happening with their word reading skills, and that will highlight that issue for us. We can also perhaps take a Year 7 non-fiction text, and we can listen to the child read that, again, take a running record on that and consider, can they decode, are they fluent, but then have a diagnostic conversation around that text to really try to unpick and explore their understanding of that key academic language and vocabulary. So if you think about it, with these two very simple tools, we can decide which children have weak decoding, good comprehension, weak decoding, weak comprehension, good decoding, weak comprehension. So those are two simple tools that we could use. We can also select some formal comprehension questions and ask the pupils to explain how they would go about answering the question. I think we need to be aware that for some pupils their reading comprehension is good, but they have problems when asked to respond to formal comprehension questions and right answers. And if we think about it, answering questions after the act of reading is a different process to understanding in the moment of reading. Readers process text slightly differently after the event, of course. And because they have to think more carefully, they've got to use their working memory, they've got to use different strategies such as locating and reflecting and gaining additional information. The other thing is that children might need support in understanding the question and knowing the type of question it is, therefore the type of answer required, and locating the answer or formulating a written response anywhere along those aspects of formulating an answer can go wrong, and we need to find out how children go about that task. When we've done that, then we can support them with that aspect. And finally, we can ask pupils to complete a simple questionnaire or survey that is used to gain their perspective about reading. The survey may include questions that are designed to reveal their view of themselves as a reader. And that's important because we need to take into account different perspectives about literacy. We tend to focus on the cognitive skills and knowledge when a child struggles with reading. But we know that actually how they feel about themselves as a reader, their personal and social identity can impact on their ability to read, as does their cultural capital. Are they part of a positive reading culture? And do we, or how do we, promote that within our class and within our school? So it may be that a child is struggling because they do have cognitive knowledge and skills, but they don't feel like a reader. And, this is a very sad thing to say, but, I believe that it is possible to teach a child to read and put them off reading at the same time if we don't get those two other aspects right. So if we are going to support children early in Year 7, it's likely to be through a combination of approaches. It's likely to be through classroom approaches and intervention approaches. So in our classroom approaches, we're thinking obviously about teaching and learning. It's about coherent policies in reading across the curriculum, across all subjects. It's about the intervention teacher and the class teacher working closely to ensure transference of skills. Pervetti and Oakhill and Kane have identified that weak reading and listening comprehension is a significant barrier to academic success in all subjects. So, interestingly, a report came out 2 days ago from the Education Endowment Foundation and the Royal Society, and they have reviewed socio-economic status and its impact on science learning. And I'm quoting here from the review: the strongest factor affecting pupils' science scores is how well they understand written texts. Poor literacy skills can affect how well a pupil is able to understand scientific vocabulary, to prepare scientific reports. Strategies to boost disadvantaged pupils' reading comprehension could have a positive impact on their achievement in science too. So it's making me think that all teachers need to take on board that they need to be teachers of literacy and not just subject. We need a coherent policy across Year 7, and we need to strike a balance between teaching a subject area and teaching the skills we need for reading, writing, speaking and listening in that subject area. We all need to be teachers of literacy in Year 7, whether we're teaching English or history or science or maths. The other aspect that we're going to be thinking about, of course, is intervention approaches. Greg Brooks, in his document, What Works for Children with Literacy Difficulties, reports how children who are behind will not catch up without an intervention. And he advocates that these interventions are targeted, time-limited, personalised. One-to-one approaches appear to be particularly effective for children who are struggling with decoding. Small group approaches appear to be particularly effective for those who are struggling with comprehension because they need to talk about what they're reading. In both classroom approaches and intervention approaches, professional development for class teachers and TAs are absolutely key. So research indicates that without an intervention, children who are behind will not catch up. Evidence-based literacy interventions, such as those listed in What Works and also on the Education Endowment Foundation website, are plentiful for primary, but actually there are fewer available for secondary. To conclude, the profile of a child having difficulty with literacy is likely to be complex and the cause is multiple, and I believe there is no quick fix, and I wouldn't believe anyone who says there is a quick fix for sorting out literacy problems. There is no one way to solve problems, but something we can do is uncover those difficulties through careful diagnosis early in Year 7 and address specific needs that are revealed and then address those issues directly. I've referenced a few documents. I've listed them at the top of this slide. And I've also referenced some interventions that I've been involved with, which really do help with quick catch-up. So I would recommend Growing Reading, Oracy and Writing at Key Stage 3, produced by the International Literacy Centre at UCL. Switch On Reading and Writing, Boosting Reading at Secondary, and Reading Comprehension Enjoyment, including an intervention called Inference Training, which is produced by Leicester City, and you can find out about that on my website, Target Literacy. The Text Help computer package, Read and Write, actually hits a lot of the buttons that I've talked about today. Okay, so I'm now going to hand you over to Jane to develop this subject further. Over to you, Jane.
Okay, well, thanks, Christine. Thanks for that. So a little bit about me. Just looking at the bio there, I've worked in primary, I've worked in secondary, I've been an LA consultant, and I'm now an independent consultant. So I kind of taught children from 6 to 16. And during my time as a consultant with one of the authorities, I was actually hosted in a secondary school about 10 years ago. They were sort of known as National Challenge Schools then. And my role was in that school to turn literacy around and to obviously improve outcomes at GCSE. And I set up a wealth of intervention programs, looking at lots and lots of different aspects, looking at reading, looking at writing, looking at spelling, looking at comprehension, looking at phonics. There was a wealth of different strategies, and I think that's the key, to have as many different kind of strategies to help all the different needs. So my session, Christine, thank you very much, is mainly about the sort of why we need to tackle low-level literacy. My session's really about how to do that. So I'm hoping by the end of here you'll have a few tips and tricks to intervene and to make it more sort of practical and meaningful. So tying in with my kind of point about lots of different targeted interventions, my first point is you've got to really be very clear and specific about what it is that you are going to affect change with on the intervention. So the focus of support needs to be really clear. Now, there's a wealth of data and information that you can gather from primary feeders, from, tests that you come in. I mean, I know that we used to blanket test all the children with reading ages and spelling ages as soon as they came in at year 7. And that was a really good kind of a leveler where we could use information. But we didn't just use that, we also used the information from CAT scores, the information from SAT scores, also information given from the primary feeder teachers. So there was a wealth of information and data to really get clear on what it is that those children actually really need. Some children would access many different intervention programs. Some children would just access 1 or 2. Some children dipped into things momentarily. So it's just about getting really clear first and foremost. So you're looking at basically their gaps in learning and their gaps in knowledge, so that you can tailor specific intervention methods to the individual pupils or groups of pupils based on what they can do and their ability. So assessment and gathering that information and getting clear is absolutely fundamental. And also, because we're in a climate of progress, you've got to realistically see where it is that their starting point is, where you need to get them to, and then obviously you can plan how to do it. I would advocate what Christine says about looking at separately their reading, decoding, phonics ability, as opposed to also their comprehension ability, for example. So, there's capacity there by doing that for skilled, intensive, one-to-one support for pupils who need, who need the decoding and the fluency intervention, as opposed to small group collaborative intervention withdrawal for developing vocabulary or for developing comprehension. So again, focus of support is absolutely key, just to know exactly what you're going to be doing. Learning, logistics and time. What I used to find setting up these programs was, teachers, the rest of the staff to be on board with the intervention. So setting up interventions is an absolute it can be an absolute logistical nightmare. And to have really clear timeframes on how long you're going to run your programs. So, to set up some kind of intervention curriculum that kind of involves both regular in-class and out-of-class provision, so that you're not withdrawing children too much from their lessons. I found that it was kind of really helpful to set it up as a kind of main curriculum design. So it was really a whole school, everyone was on board with it, everyone knew what it was, and I mean, we're talking 10 years ago now, so it wasn't quite as kind of, in the here and now and hearsay as it is today. But, everybody was on board, all teachers were aware of it, but most importantly, they were aware of how it would impact their subject and its importance. Now, how you set it up is entirely up to your school and how you organise it. It could look like a sort of transitions curriculum in year 7, where the children are initially put into specific classes and taught to ability with at least sort of 45 minutes of specific intervention for 4 days a week. It could, similarly, you could have a tutor sort of reading programs on a 6-weekly basis where children are withdrawn, and also there's paired reading going on and there's peer support reading going on. You could have I know one school does a sort of rise and read program where for 2 mornings a week, pupils in year 7 are sort of encouraged to start school at 7:30 in the morning, and they use the first 30 minutes of the day to sort of engage in reading activities. So you can have timetabled intervention classes where they're withdrawn for, 30 minutes and to an hour from certain lessons for 10 to 12 weeks. Or you can use similarly sort of individual sort of published programs during lesson time for reading and spelling, and they can sort of become routine and timetabled within those lessons. there's lots and lots of sort of suggestions which Christine's already mentioned from the Education Endowment Foundation website. There's also some suggestions on the DFE sort of literacy and numeracy catch-up strategies document. Also, there's an evaluative report for intervention programmes from the University of Sheffield as well. So there are documents that you can refer to give you some sort of ideas on what to use and how to use them. And there are a lot of popular programs that are used in schools. I know that a lot of schools use programs, you know, like the Catch-Up Reading program, which is a very targeted one-on-one support reading catch-up. There's Alexia, which is often used with dyslexic children. Word Wasp, Accelerated Reader. There's lots of different programs. But as you know, mentioned before, Text Helps Read and Write software would fit in really well because it can be accessed across the whole school. It can be used in both class support and out of class. It would be routine. It could be used as part of their provision, and also they can use it at home as well. So that is a really good kind of catch-all program. Basically, at the end of the day, whatever program you adopt, it ultimately has to make an impact over a specific period of time. So, you know, you have to be really rigid on that, and you set them up and you'll say, right, we're going to do that program with those children for X number of weeks, and then monitor, see the progress, and if it's not working, then you take them off. I mean, I would say that a good length of time would be about sort of 10 to 12 weeks. You want a 10 to 12 week program. If you don't see any progress, then you've got to come away from it and do something else. Okay. Right, establishing individual and team goals at the start. So you want whatever interventions you're doing to be kind of supportive, and you want to create a kind of aspirational climate with the children. Many sort of intervention programs that are out there do have a sort of cooperative learning at their core. So that, you know, involves the children all working together and to master the reading skills together. And there's a kind of collegiate approach to some of these programs, which is really good because it kind of helps them not only have their own individual targets, but also if you try and get the team to sort of, or the group to, you know, have a team goal or a team target, it really does help set up, it really gives them all a focus to get towards and work together to do that. And probably an example of that would be probably better to give at this point. So, for example, when we were running groups for comprehension, or reading skills, we would have, say, okay, as a team, as a group, we want to improve our skimming. We want to improve the time it takes us to skim a text and to get the gist. So, you know, at the start, it might have taken us 5 minutes, and we want it to take us 2 minutes. So, you know, paragraph or a page of A4, you know, it'll be different for each group. So that would be the whole team, and they would work together to achieve that over a period of time. And that would also improve their individual ability too. So a lot of them would learn how to, they all learn how to skim properly. They all learn how to summarize as well when they were skimming and getting the information. So there was a lot of different skills that were coming in there, but together, they worked together, they achieved that goal together as a team. So it's very much a supportive and aspirational climate that you're really trying to encourage. And they don't feel like it's just them and they're on their own. Okay, seems really obvious, but when it happens, when you do link the content to their interests and their subject-related topics, it does make such a difference. If they're interested in fishing or festivals or whatever it is, then use that, you know, information and involve it. Having also a real purpose and audience makes a massive difference, for further inspiration and motivation. I'll give a sort of example with that. So with the Year 7 and 8 reciprocal reading programme that we ran, that was basically to improve their comprehension and also their confidence, and we basically linked it with a project with the primary feeders. So those children were chosen to basically help the children in the primary feeders, so they would build up their own skills. They would source reading materials that they felt would interest the primary feeders as the primary children as well as themselves, and they had to then prepare readings and prepare to go into the primary feeders. Now that had such a massive impact on their development, because not only were they interested in what they were reading, but also it gave them a real purpose and audience to actually work towards improving. So I would advocate you try and utilise their interests as much as possible. Monitoring progress. Right, good old progress monitoring. It's in everything we do. It's part of our DNA now, isn't it? So, inspection purposes, it's so important to have clear records of data to show progress for your intervention groups. And also, it's really important that you're not just keeping them, but you're referring to them constantly, and you're utilising them to assess whether that particular intervention method is actually working for that group, and whether it is or not, that whether a new one needs to be explored. So you're using it, as a working document and not just a collection of data. But also, not just for inspectors. I think that progress needs to also be, it's really important for the children to know that they're moving forward, and for them to have their progress monitored and be monitoring it for themselves. So any kind of time that you can acknowledge that progress by reviewing it regularly with them as part of the process is really very important. Also, dropping into English classes to see if these intervention strategies are being used, as well as across the curriculum. Talk regularly with them about their work and what they're doing, and how they're helping themselves to understand texts in science, and what strategies are they using to help with spelling in geography. So you're talking and you're helping them to transfer these skills that they're learning in their intervention classes across the curriculum. Acknowledge these improvements and celebrate all the small steps and wins, no matter how small, even if it's just about their confidence. For me, it's, absolutely not rocket science that self-esteem and confidence, once they've got some self-esteem and confidence in their literacy, in their reading, in their writing, in their spelling, they start to fly. So, it all comes with them being able to see that they are moving forward. So for me, that's, very, very important. Okay, so going from sort of looking at tips and tricks of how to kind of intervene, I'm going to sort of look at now the tools to kind of help the whole school staff. So that's more, before it was about the sort of intervention programs for those individuals and groups. Now it's about how do you actually get school literacy improvement across the whole school? How do you get everyone on board? So, first things first, it's not a tool, but it's absolutely massively necessary. So, establishing a school culture. First and foremost, the whole school has to have an ongoing school priority to improve literacy, and it's got to be driven by somebody from the SLT. So in my experience, they might be directly leading it or supporting or line managing the whole school literacy leader. But in my experience, sort of unless that happens, there's very little headway, and many initiatives will just sort of go by the wayside or flounder. So it really is important that, somebody in the SLT is driving, or at least is, managing literacy with the literacy leader across the school. It needs to be driven from the top. So when that's secured and you've got a whole school policy, the message then goes out to all departments, it goes out to all teachers, that everybody has a crucial role to play in supporting students' literacy development. And even more so now with the new sort of SPAG requirements that are on board, every single teacher, as I know Christine said it in her section, is a literacy teacher. It is just so important that everybody is working towards doing that. So that message is strong, it's non-negotiable, and it's upheld. Everyone, and at a minimum, all subjects should at least be developing students' language through the use of subject-specific vocabulary, the different styles of writing that they're using, and also lots and lots of talk going on in the classroom. Learning environments as well. When I was sort of setting this up, we found that having sort of a sort of consistent learning environment for literacy in every single classroom, where the same spelling strategies, the same ways to do things were in every single classroom as prompts. We found that really helped support children and students. It just becomes really clear then, and also there's kind of like a literacy checklist for success in every sort of class. It could include as well some high quality reading materials, sort of dictionaries and thesauruses. And I mean, I know that sounds sort of mad in this day and age, but actually access to dictionary and thesauruses was, you're not going to improve vocabulary, not going to improve children's ability to be independently spelling and being more sort of adventurous with vocabulary if you're not going to provide the tools that's going to help them do that. So to make sure there's access to all of those resources in classrooms, and lists of appropriate vocabulary and so on. And this can also, be used as a monitoring tool for, for evaluation. Also, literacy needs to be on every single meeting agenda. No matter what subject, no matter what meeting, it always needs to be on the agenda. I kind of like to sort of carry on from this. That then kind of evolves into developing this sort of house style of, literacy. This is how we do literacy in our school, all of us together. This is, a continuity of approach in teaching literacy in all subjects. So there's a sort of commonality of approach and commonality of kind of language that's used. So how to do this? Well, you sort of start with the priorities of your school and what you need as a school, and you hammer these key strategies out, hammer them out half term by half term, in a sort of half term by half term action plan. So, for example, we're going to look at shared reading. We're going to read text with children, with students. We're going to use there's different approaches, but I use this sort of reading and thinking voice approach, where they're actually reading using reading voice, which is the sort of decoding of text, and the thinking voice is where you're doing the comprehension bit that underpins the internal dialogue and the internal voice of comprehension that's going on. So you as a teacher, all the whole staff, when you're reading and sharing text, you actually deploy these strategies when you're sharing the text for fluency and comprehension. And for writing, where you might have a regular sort of demonstration, live demonstration and modelling, as opposed to just scaffolding. That has far more impact, modelling, writing in front of students, than just scaffolding and giving frames. So also spellings, you reinforce strategies, and you will have the same way of teaching the spelling strategies and build up the spelling repertoire across the whole school. So talk strategies, right. I think it's really important to have more talk going on in lessons. And I think one of the first CPD sessions we did was all about building more talk into lessons and into classes, because at the end of the day, it's so important for anybody to be confident and communicating, and communication is what is going to get you on in life. So communicating ideas verbally and being fluent and articulate, well, it is a skill for life. So classroom talk should be dominated by students, and yet so often when I go into lessons, it's dominated by teachers. I'd say it is getting a little less so, but it's still not enough student talk going on in lessons. So plan more collaborative, active talking activities into lessons, because basically if they can't say it, they won't write it. And also, talking through activities and discussing things involves reasoning, it involves problem solving, and it also helps with vocabulary development. And it also is inclusive because it enables those students who perhaps aren't very confident writers or readers to have, some of them might be really confident at articulating themselves verbally. So it's recognising the value in that talk and getting ideas, opinions out, getting before they write, and developing their own sort of spoken vocabulary and getting clear. And it's also part of the whole review and reflection process when they're writing as well. Okay, basic literacy skills and marking. So again, this is across the whole school. So you might have a marking code that has basic literacy marking on it. You're ensuring that key subject spellings, grammar and reading skills, such as skimming and scanning, keywords, note-taking, summarising, that they're taught, that they're practiced, and that they're embedded throughout all subjects. So it's important to secure improvement across the school as well as embed these key skills for life. It can be simple and effective through a policy of, I've done it really simply where it's literally, right, these are 5 do's and don'ts we do as a school. So I'll give you an example. If it's just, say, you're developing writing and organising content to encourage better extended writing. So you would have, as a staff, one of the policy would be that you don't just set an extended writing task and expect the students to just find their own way through it, but you do give them time and opportunity to generate and sort content, and wherever possible let them share with and learn from each other. So you're building in that talk. And, that starts right from the planning process. So you're drawing their attention to how different texts are organised. So you're looking at the different text types and the different structures and the organisational structures and language features. And then you're asking them to replicate the structures in their own text. So you need to model. So that's kind of a sort of policy that you could have some 5 do's or don'ts for reading, 5 do's and don'ts, 1 do's and don'ts for reading, 1 for spelling, 1 for developing and organising writing, and so on. And then you're going to consistently mark their work using the code across all subjects to adhere to that. Another sort of whole school approach is to embark on buying whole school sort of licensed IT programs. So there's an absolute wealth of different programs out there because you want ultimately students to be reading and writing independently and having access to text. And sometimes, the texts that are very difficult in some subjects, enabling them to have access to them. So again, I'll mention Text Helps Read and Write program, because that, as mentioned previously, does exactly that, and it helps students to be independent, helps them to access text, and across all formats. That includes the internet, across worksheets, across text, and it provides tools for reading, vocabulary, and spelling. Okay, readability of text. I know Christine mentioned this a little bit before. It's a little bit of a sort of, I get a little bit of a bee in my bonnet about it, because one of the first things I ever did as a literacy leader was to ask every teacher to kind of bring their current textbook or their regular classroom text to a meeting. And I talked everyone through sort of the SMOG test, and they worked out the readability of their textbook. And what we discovered was that most secondary textbooks at that particular time were aimed at sort of reading ages of 15 years plus. So, you know, that's pretty challenging for some Year 7 students. I then sort of issued with sort of the reading age scores for the classes in their Year 7 groups. And what became clear was that there was a huge discrepancy in ability in text match. Some of those children actually had reading ages below 8, and they were expected to access texts that were 15 years plus. Then, taking one of the texts, we sort of explored and adapted it to change it to a reading age of 12, and then 10, and then 8, and then 6. So they could really visually see what basically those reading ages meant in relation to access to text. Well, as you can imagine, there was absolute shock and silence around the room, and there was a massive penny drop and realisation that actually it was almost, they realised that the requirements of what they were asking their children to do was just, well, it was just incredible, putting the demands on their children like that. So I think that meeting had the most profound effect on changing people's attitudes to reading materials in lessons, and differentiation suddenly became really popular. But also, not just popular, it was really meaningful, and the importance of it became very, very clear. So access to reading materials is so important to literacy development, and you know, children's ability to read is so important, but you can do it by adapting or by modifying text. Again, using or helping students by using, you know, programs like Text Help, Read and Write program. But from Christine's slide, the children's comments about the length of text they have to read, about the difficulty in the vocabulary. So they do notice a massive difference between primary and secondary reading requirements. So, you know, if you take away one thing from today, I would say take a look at your textbooks and your reading materials, and do look at the SMOG, and do look at SMOG texting, and differentiating some of your reading materials that you use in lessons across the curriculum. Because you know, they literally have to have a reading age of 9.6 to access the curriculum in the first instance. So yeah, and finally, you know, for a whole school literacy, fit for purpose CPD. We've all been there. We've all sat in training that, you know, didn't feel very meaningful. But it's got to be fit for purpose, meaningful training that it can take many forms, but what's important is it's got to be aligned to the priority literacy needs for the whole school and of the staff. It's got to be implemented immediately. So there's absolutely, you know, we're doing this today, we expect to see this in lessons tomorrow onwards. The results are clear because they're around practical approaches. So I'll give a for example. So let's say that you're focusing on spelling. So by the end of that CPD session, all departments should know 3 effective strategies for teaching the spellings that are important to their subject. So they've got 3 spelling strategies, and they need to plan to use them in the next week. And then, you know, a literacy leader will go in and monitor the use of these across the school. So that's really I think, very important to really start to embed literacy improvement across the school. Also different ways, not sort of less formal CPD. You can have 5-minute literacy CPD in staff meetings and briefings where you can literally refresh SPAG terminology, introduce key vocabularies that you know, need to be developed across all subjects. Even question and answer, 5-minute question and answer sessions about, you know, literacy related problems and issues. So that's sort of less informal, but it's constant, and it's, you know, literacy being on the agenda of every single meeting. Okay, so hopefully those sort of tips and tricks and the tools will help with your intervention and literacy development across the school. And I'll now hand you over to Richard.
Thank you very much, Jane, and thank you very much to Christine as well. So, hello folks, my name is Richard Michael and I work within the Education Division at TextHelp. My background, like Jane and Christine, is actually in education. I joined TextHelp 2 years ago, and before joining TextHelp I taught within the Learning Support Department of a secondary school here in Northern Ireland. TextHelp, that's where we're based, in Antrim in Northern Ireland, and it's an assistive software company who have been developing and constantly improving software solutions for the last 20 years. One of those solutions is our Read and Write software. So today I'm going to give you a brief look at Read and Write and talk about all its benefits. My contact details are currently on the screen at the moment, so if you'd like to get in touch with us after today, I'd be more than happy to offer you a demonstration of how the Read and Write toolbar works. Also, the team email address for the Education Division, if you just simply replace the r.michael with education, that's the email address for the entire team. Just give you a few moments to take down any of those details there, but we will go back to those as well. First of all, text readers can now be used as approved by the Joint Council for Qualifications and Examinations. Read and Write is one of those text readers. Read and Write can also be used as a text reader in exams which assess English, where human readers aren't actually allowed. Read and Write, the toolbar, allows a student to work independently at a pace they're fully comfortable with, both in exams and out of exams in a classroom situation or study situation. Read and Write also eliminates any embarrassment that a student may feel when asking a human reader to have text read several times, therefore increasing student confidence. For those of you seeing Read and Write for the first time, on the screen currently you can see a Microsoft Word document on volcanoes with the Read and Write toolbar at the top of the screen there. That's how the toolbar sits at the top of the screen, on top of the Microsoft Word toolbar, or Adobe toolbar if you're reading a PDF file, or Internet Explorer toolbar if you're reading a web page, for example. It's a very discreet, slick toolbar with multiple different functions. The toolbar engages the user in audio and visual learning, which has been proven to improve learning, and allows the pupil to comprehend the subject more quickly. The core functionality of Read and Write is text-to-speech, where the reader can have any text on a computer screen read aloud, as demonstrated on the screen now. The dual highlighting colours that you can see highlighting the text there is also built into the Read and Write toolbar. The user can fully customize the voice to a pitch, speed and volume that meets their specific needs and requirements. The dual highlighting colours, that you can also see on the screen there, allows the user to track and process the text as it's being read aloud, and that can also be fully adjusted or tailored to meet the needs of the user. At TextHelp and within Read and Write, our core message is literacy to life, and we believe that every pupil in primary school, secondary school or university, or even adult learners should have the ability to read and write. Read and Write started as a tool for SEN, but developed into so much more over the years. As you can see on the screen at the moment, Read and Write can help your students with their study, and when capturing text from a web page, if they're carrying out any research tasks for assignments or for revision for exams. Read and Write will actually provide the student with a bibliography for any of their internet research, saving them a lot of time in the process. Our initial goal was to support those who struggle with literacy. This is not just people with dyslexia. Our software is perfect for those with visual impairments, those who suffer from scotopic sensitivity, and a massive area where Read and Write is becoming invaluable is within EAL students and just general low literacy levels. So why does Read and Write help teachers? Using features such as the screenshot reader, scanner, and vocabulary table builder, teachers can create resources with greater ease and provide students with resources and information that perhaps was inaccessible before. The use of the vocab table, audio maker, and picture dictionary allow teachers to create a classroom and learning environment which is conducive to all learning styles. Read and Write also allows the student to enter the zone of proximal development and help themselves in increasingly diverse and busy classrooms. Teachers can keep track of student spelling as well through the spelling log kept for each student in the spell checker feature, and thus be able to show progression in students' spelling. Read and Write, as it reads exactly what you've written, can also be used by absolutely everyone as a very effective proofreader as well, for assignments, for homeworks, for work reports, or even drafts of emails. So if you do want to see any of our products, such as the Read and Write toolbar in action, please feel free to get in touch with me or any of my colleagues at the details that we provided you with on the first screen. I will go back to that in just a second. And of course, at the end of today, if you have any questions or any thoughts for me, please feel free to ask those as well.
Brilliant. Thanks, Richard.
Thank you very much, Jonathan.
No, thank you. That's excellent. It's a really good top-line overview. I mean, I know personally it's excellent software, but that was a really nice overview. So yeah, thanks for that. Thanks also to Jane and Christine for those detailed, really looks at the tools, of the ways in which you can help students and teachers give their students the right tools to get off to a great start at secondary school and to set the foundations for future success. I've got a couple of questions, a couple of things. Jane, firstly, if I may. You focused in on progress and monitoring progress. Obviously, that's a key part of the school life now. What kind of progress gains should we be aiming for, do you think, with these intervention programs?
Okay, so often we should be using sort of what we call a ratio gain formula to check that the students are kind of making good progress, modest progress, remarkable progress. So how you do this is you would look at first and foremost you want to be making at least a ratio gain of 2. So how this works is if it was a 6-month program and they improved by, say it was a reading age, and they improved by 12 months, that would be a ratio gain of 2. So you've doubled basically their rate of progress. So in 6 months they've made a year's progress. And there are actually stipulated guidelines for this. It was sort of highlighted in the Rhodes Review, sort of based on sort of Dr. Singleton's interventions for dyslexia information. But within that, you are looking at sort of a ratio gain sort of between 2 and 3 is seen as being useful, a useful impact, and so between 3 and 4 is sort of substantial, and between above 4 is remarkable. So by monitoring these sort of ratio gains, you can see whether the intervention programs are effective and working, and whether you should continue, and whether they've had an impact, or actually whether they haven't.
And is that a continual thing, or is that a review every 2 weeks or every month?
No, it's usually a review over the program. So
okay.
if you're doing sort of a 2-month program, you know, then you will look at the ratio gains after the 10 weeks or whatever it is that you're doing. And then if it's, you know, made a significant impact, then you know it's working.
Yeah.
And you might then, you know, say, right, they've reached this, or you might continue. It just depends on the gains that they're making.
And who would deliver these intervention programs day to day?
Well, when I think you've got, often in secondary schools, they've got a really strong learning support department. And I would, you know, advise that I know that the learning support assistants, when I worked, they were all trained up in all of these different kinds of strategies and intervention programs, and they also worked in lessons. So you're getting that, you know, withdrawal intervention support, but they're also being able to support the students in lessons with the same sort of strategies. And they also get a whole overview of how the children and the students are applying the interventions in the classrooms. Ultimately, it will be led by, you know, either the SENCO or the literacy leader across the school. They'll have, you know, the overall overview of it.
Yeah. I just wondered, you know, on a practical sort of day-to-day basis, who gets involved.
Yeah, but, you know, all staff can also, like with the spelling strategies and...
well, yeah, as you said, you made the point.
Absolutely,
yeah, for the whole school approach,
Yeah,
no, that made total sense to me. And I think it's, in a way, it takes a certain force of character to get whole school approaches to anything. But it's in cases of low literacy, and having seen the impact of literacy on life outcomes, it's so important, I think, to get that right.
Which is why you have to have it come from the top.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thanks, Jane. Appreciate that.
Yeah.
Christine, if you're still there, hello.
I am.
Good, listening keenly. One of I had a thought while I was looking at your quadrants about what happens after reading. If we found that pupils, say, were struggling with the processes of answering questions and formulating written responses after reading, how could that be supported?
There are some great approaches, and I think what we need to do is avoid just giving children endless practice papers. What we need to do is pull that process right apart and actually share with children the processes of how we would go about answering questions. What type of question is it? What type of answer it is? When we've got an answer, how do we flip that question into an answer? And sometimes it's about giving a writing frame for an answer to start with, and then reducing that writing frame. I would recommend, I don't know if we can go back to that list of references that I gave at the end of
Would you like me to? I can flip back.
Would that be all right, Jonathan?
Yeah, I'm sure Richard won't mind for a second.
The Reading Comprehension and Enjoyment package from Leicester City, inference training, there's some great resources in there to actually support children with that whole process of practicing and working out what questions mean. I'll give you a lovely example of where a child was confused. She was in a test situation, and this was in Year 7, and she started to talk to a child next to her, and when asked afterwards, why were you talking, she said, well, the question said, discuss.
Nice.
That's what she thought she should do, is discuss out loud. And you can see where children, go wrong when they think the question says, read the table, and they're thinking, table? Well, I'm actually working on a table. So even things as simple as that, we have to watch out for.
Yeah. It's interesting. I would say, on that topic, it's slightly a tangent. My 13-year-old daughter sometimes struggles. She's not so much with literacy, but certainly in some of the science subjects, and this touches on Jane's whole school approach, with applying or turning the question into something that she can actually apply an answer to, if you know what I mean.
Mm.
So, she doesn't realise necessarily that there's a formula required as the answer just by reading the question.
Yes,
so,
absolutely.
and I think, as Jane said, to get all of the school working towards an understanding of what's behind the words as well as just the words themselves is important. There was one other thing I was wondering, Christine, while we're talking. Group versus one-to-one in terms of comprehension strategies.
Yeah. There's, because we are trying to develop a child's understanding of the text that they're reading, it's going to be absolutely important that we get children to talk. And Jane mentioned that in her presentation. There's something about hearing somebody else's perspective of a text that can develop our own thinking. And that allows us to see different viewpoints. It actually allows us to build and construct meaning. What we're not doing when we're reading is just taking a photocopy of it with our brains. Actually, we're building meaning. Yeah. So talk is an important part of that.
And that's, again, that comes out in the examples you gave and also in what Jane was talking about in terms of getting children just to understand what's being put in front of them and
it's not enough just to read the words. Yeah,
absolutely. Okay, well, if there's no other questions coming in from the audience, then I think we have about 3 minutes left. So we'll shortly be drawing the webinar to a conclusion. Just a reminder for our audience that a recording will be available shortly on the Education Today and Text Help websites. So if anyone who's listening today has colleagues who they think would benefit from listening to it at a later time, please do let them know. And finally, as mentioned, if there were any questions later, then I'll just quickly flick forward and find Richard's contact details, because I'm sure Richard would be delighted to hear from you. So, with that in mind, I'd just like to thank Christine, Jane and Richard again for taking the time today to share their insights with us, and also to thank you, our audience, for attending. Thank you, and goodbye for now.